It was a hot day, and the sun shone brightly over the golden sands of the land we call home. I remember how the heat seemed to linger in the air, almost palpable, like the dreams floating in my mind. My name is Zuri, and I was about to embark on a journey that would change not only my life, but the history of my people. Since I was a child, I had heard stories about our origins, about how we were descendants of great nations and civilizations that shaped the world. But the truth often felt distant, a mirage I longed to find. In the village, the voices of the past whispered in my ears. The elders told tales of times when our people thrived, when the lands were fertile and the rivers abundant. They spoke of a God who guided our steps and a destiny that awaited us beyond the mountains. But now, what I saw was a reality marked by struggle and survival. The lands that once flourished were dry, and the sound of children's laughter that used to echo in the streets had been replaced by murmurs of concern. As I walked along the dirt paths leading to the central square, I could see the tired faces of my neighbors. There was a sadness in their eyes, a weight that seemed to hang over our shoulders. I felt it too, a constant pressure, as if history were watching us, waiting for us to make a decision. What was at stake? It was more than just our survival. It was our identity, our connection to the past and the future. That morning, Elder Kofi summoned us all for a meeting. He was an imposing figure, with hair as white as snow and eyes that sparkled with the wisdom of years. When he began to speak, his voice resonated like a deep echo, enveloping everyone present once again. He spoke about the tribes that once inhabited this land, about our ancestors who crossed seas and mountains in search of purpose. It was a call to action, a summons for us as a people to unite in search of our roots. Kofi spoke of the Bible, a book that for many seemed distant but contained the keys to understanding our history. As he spoke, a wave of emotions washed over me, hope, doubt, and a growing determination. What did I really know about our origins? How could we reclaim our identity if we were so lost? I looked around at the faces. Some were inspired, others skeptical, but all shared a spark of curiosity. What more could we discover about who we were and where we came from? The atmosphere was charged with expectation and at the same time a palpable fear of the unknown. The story of the origins of the African people was intertwined with the biblical narrative, and each word spoken by Kofi seemed to open a new door in my mind. I wondered, what lay beyond that door? What truths, what legacies were waiting to be revealed? And more importantly, what did it mean for us, for our community, and for the future of our children? The journey beginning was not going to be easy, but it was clear that together we could explore the depths of our origins. A new chapter was about to be written, and I was determined to be a part of it. As Elder Kofi's meeting progressed, I struggled to process everything being said. The words echoed in my mind, each one a seed planted in fertile soil, awakening a desire to discover more. After the meeting ended, I decided to approach a few friends who were nearby, trying to understand how each of them felt about that summons. "Do you really think we can reclaim our origins?" Amina asked, her trembling voice revealing insecurity. She had always been the most sensitive among us, often worried about the future of the village. "We have to try, don't we?" I replied, trying to inject confidence into my own voice. "If we do nothing, what will be left for us? Just the same hopeless life." "But what if we fail?" Malik interjected, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the dusty ground. "We are so far removed from all of that. Our ancestors, the stories, all of that could just be legends." Those words cut me like a knife. I knew Malik was dealing with his own internal battle, but his doubt resonated alarmingly within me. What if the legends are the key to our survival? We need to understand who we are to know how to move forward. Amina shook her head, but her gaze was lost somewhere distant. I just don't know if I'm ready to face this. What if the truths we find are painful? I understood. The fear of what we might discover was a shadow that followed us, but a part of me was eager to confront that shadow. If we don't open the door, we'll never know what's behind it. And what's worse, to live without knowing, or to live with the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. The conversation lingered in my mind, and as I walked back home, Kofi's words echoed in my head, mingled with the doubts and fears of my friends. The heat of the day seemed to intensify, and the dust raised by our steps covered my bare feet. The difficulties we faced every day were tangible. The scarcity of water, the crops that wouldn't come, the rising tensions in relations with neighboring villages also struggling for resources. Those problems, which once seemed simple, were now becoming insurmountable mountains. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of my house seemed to be closing in on me, and I was trapped in a whirlwind of thoughts. What would this journey mean? What did I really hope to find? The stories of our ancestors were inspiring, but what if reality was very different? What if our quest didn't bring the answers we longed for? The next morning, the sunlight seemed brighter, more intense. As I stepped outside, I found Kofi standing in the shade of a leafy tree, watching the village inhabitants move with tired expressions. He saw me and smiled, a gesture that seemed to contain ancestral wisdom. "Zuri," he began, "the search for our origins is not just an act of discovery, but a path of resistance. You feel that, don't you?" "Yes, Elder, but I'm afraid. Afraid of what we might find, and what that could mean for us." Kofi nodded, his penetrating eyes seeming to see beyond me. Fear is a constant companion on meaningful journeys. It can paralyze us or propel us forward. The decision of how you face it is yours. Kofi's words reverberated in my mind. The challenge was not just to uncover our past, but also to deal with our fears and insecurities. What was at stake was our identity, and that required courage. In the days that followed, the village began to mobilize. Groups formed to discuss and explore the stories that could connect us to our past. Meanwhile, the daily hardships continued to accumulate, and the atmosphere of tension grew. Criticism and voices of discontent became more frequent. Malik, in particular, became more vocal about his concerns. "We are distracting ourselves with stories when we should be focused on solving the real problems we face now," he would say, and I could see the frustration growing in his eyes. That challenged me. It was easy to get lost in debates about the past when the present was so oppressive. But at the same time, I knew that the discovery of our origins might be the key to the resistance we so desperately needed. How could we find balance between what was happening now and what had been? With each passing day, the tension increased. Discussions that had once been about hope turned into heated debates, and the division between those who believed in the importance of the search and those who saw it as a distraction deepened. I felt my heart heavy, as if I were on a tightrope between two worlds. What to do? Should we persist in our search or focus on immediate survival? The answer seemed as distant as the mountains surrounding our village. The days dragged on, and the tension in the village became palpable. Conversations that had once been filled with hope were now laden with frustration and despair. Malik, who had always been a pillar of support, began to isolate himself, and his critical voice grew louder. He was not alone in this, and I realized that others shared his concerns. Amina, who used to be the most optimistic in the group, now hesitated to join the discussions about the stories of our ancestors. The weight of reality was suffocating our aspirations. I often found myself in a dilemma. How could I advocate for a search for our origins when the basic needs of the village were not being met? The water shortage was becoming more acute with each passing day, and the crops seemed to wither before they even ripened. The neighboring villages were becoming more hostile, and rumors of imminent conflict spread like wildfire. What had seemed like a journey of self-discovery was now becoming a luxury we could not afford. One morning, as I walked to the village's central square, I found Malik among a group of villagers discussing heatedly. The tone of his voice was raised and frustration was etched on his face. "We need to act now. We can't get lost in stories while our water runs dry and our children go hungry." He gestured, his passion almost contagious, but the fear and doubt of many seemed to overshadow his message. I tried to approach, but the atmosphere was charged with a tension that felt almost palpable. "Malik, I understand your concerns," I said, raising my hand in a gesture of peace, "but the stories we are seeking may give us the strength we need to face these challenges. We cannot forget who we are, and what are we, Zuri?" he asked, his voice filled with bitterness. "A village sunk in traditions that do not nourish us. The legends won't bring water to our taps or food to our tables." Those words hurt. I knew that the struggle for our origins was a necessary journey, but how could I convince him of that when he was right in his frustration? Despair was creeping into the hearts of the villagers, and the unity that had once brought us together was fragmenting. What had been a search for identity was becoming an internal battle, and I found myself lost between the voices calling for immediate change and those seeking to understand our past. That same night as I lay down, the darkness felt more oppressive. The walls of my home, which had once been a refuge, now felt like a prison. My thoughts swirled around Malik and his growing influence over others. What would happen if he decided to oppose the search for our origins? I couldn't let that happen. We needed a purpose, something that would unite us instead of divide us. The village meetings had become a battleground with the elders, including Kofi, trying to mediate the growing conflict. Voices intertwined in a chorus of despair and hope, but the division was clear. Those who wanted to focus on the present and those who believed the past could guide us were in constant clash. The pressure was mounting, and in a moment of weakness, I realized that the struggle for our origins was not just about what we would find, but how we would stay united in the face of such intense adversities. One afternoon, while walking alone through the forest surrounding the village, I found a small lake hidden among the trees. The water reflected the sky, and for a moment, everything seemed calm. But the tranquility was quickly replaced by the reality I had left behind. The rising tensions in the village were not just a matter of survival. They were a reflection of our own insecurities and fears. The search I so desperately desired could be what saved us, but it could also become our ruin if we did not find a way to unite our voices, instead of letting them confront each other. Deep down, I knew this journey would not be easy. The struggle for our roots and for the survival of the village could not be separated. The challenge now was to find a balance, a way to unite the stories that connected us to the past with the actions we needed to take in the present. What had once seemed like a clear path had now become a labyrinth, and as tensions rose, I knew that my determination to seek our origins would test not only my courage, but also the cohesion of the entire village. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. The tension in the village only increased, and the weight of responsibilities piled up on me like a storm ready to erupt. Malik and his followers became increasingly vocal, organizing secret meetings where they spoke about the need to act, to seek practical solutions to the problems that plagued us before we got lost in stories. And in the meantime, I found myself struggling against the growing feeling that our search for our roots was fading in the face of the urgency of survival. One night, in a tense meeting under the dim light of torches, Malik challenged the elders. If we don't take action, we will become shadows of ourselves. We can no longer live on promises of the past. The murmur of agreement echoed through the room, and I felt like a stranger, isolated in a sea of voices calling for action. Kofi, the wisest among the elders, raised his hand, trying to restore order. We need to listen to the stories of our ancestors. They will guide us on the path of recovery we need. What are we without our memories? But his words were drowned out by cries of frustration and despair. With each passing day, Malik's words resonated more strongly within me. I knew he was right in many ways. Thirst and hunger would not wait for stories to be quenched. But at the same time, a part of me rebelled against that idea, understanding that what we were trying to preserve was as vital as what we needed to survive. The struggle between immediate necessity and the search for deeper meaning became an emotional duel that consumed me. That night I lay awake, my mind agitated. What could I do to unite the village? I knew it was time to act, but how could I do that without losing sight of who we were? The decisions presented themselves like a complicated puzzle, and the pressure on my shoulders grew by the moment. One morning, as I walked through the village, I noticed that the faces that had once been familiar were now marked by worry and fatigue. The children played in silence, and the adults exchanged concerned glances. The unity that had once defined us was disintegrating, and I needed to find a way to restore it. I decided it was time for a call to action. I gathered all the villagers in the central square, a gesture that felt as desperate as it was necessary. My heart raced as I observed the expressions of skepticism and anxiety. I knew it wouldn't be easy. "Friends," I began, my voice trembling but firm, "we are on the brink of a division that could destroy us. Malik is right in many ways. Our daily struggle is real, but we cannot forget who we are. Our stories connect us and can give us the strength to face the challenges ahead." The words came out with difficulty, each syllable carrying the weight of an internal dilemma. Emotion was running high, and I felt that every gaze turned toward me was a challenge. Malik was there, standing at the back of the square, arms crossed, a look of distrust on his face. I knew this was the moment. I needed to convince him. I needed to convince them all. If we do not unite, if we do not remember who we are, the challenges we face now will only become more difficult. What is expected of us? That we forget our roots and fight alone in an increasingly hostile world. We need a purpose, and that purpose must come from our past and our stories. The crowd began to murmur, some voices rising in support, others in disagreement. Malik then broke the silence. "And how do you propose we do that, Zuri? What stories can save us from the reality we face?" His voice was challenging, but there was a hint of vulnerability that did not escape me. "Let's tell our stories, share our fears and hopes. Let's come together and remember what made us strong, and from these stories we can find practical solutions for our survival," I replied, adrenaline coursing through my veins. It was a risky bet, but I felt it was the right path. The climax was approaching, and I knew that the decision we made now would shape not only our future, but also the future of our village. Malik looked at me, and for a brief moment, the fury in his eyes transformed into something softer, perhaps a spark of hope. What would come next would depend on our ability to unite our voices, to find a balance between the present and the past. The struggle was just beginning, and I was about to discover whether the strength of our stories could prevail over the despair that threatened to separate us. The tension in the square was palpable, almost as if the air was charged with electricity. I felt the weight of the gazes on me, a mix of anticipation and skepticism. What had started as an attempt to unite the village was now turning into an emotional battleground where words could be weapons and stories, shields. Malik was there, just a few steps away, and his presence made my heart race. I knew he was a powerful force, but he was also a light that could flicker out quickly if we did not find common ground. "Zuri," he began, his voice calmer now, but still firm. "You talk of stories, but where are the solutions? Where are the seeds you promised to plant so we can reap the fruits?" He gestured, and his passion was contagious. There was a crowd waiting for an answer, and I needed to find the right way to connect with everyone there. I took a deep breath. The stories are the roots that sustain us. They bring forth what we are and what we can be. But they are not just narratives of the past. They contain lessons we can apply now. Let's listen to what our ancestors have to teach us about resilience and unity. How about we start with the story of how we overcame the drought years ago? What brought us together during that crisis? A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Some people began to murmur among themselves, recalling that difficult time. I saw faces lighting up with memories, and I realized a connection was forming. Malik was still skeptical, but I noticed a slight change in his expression. Kofi, the elder, made a move to come closer. Zuri is right. Our stories shape us. The drought we faced taught us about solidarity, about how we came together to build a well that saved our lives. Do you remember the night when everyone gathered to dig? It was a collective effort, a testament to what we can achieve together. Kofi's words brought forth a wave of memories. People began to share their experiences, narrating how, in the midst of despair, the village united to face adversity. The atmosphere was changing, and the energy that was once heavy began to dissolve, giving way to a rebirth of hope. Malik, noticing the change, raised his hand again. And after that? What will happen if the drought returns? If what we have is not enough to sustain our families? His voice was loud, but now there was a note of uncertainty. He was starting to listen, and that gave me courage. Let's unite, Malik, I said, with determination growing inside me. Let's blend our stories with concrete actions. We can cultivate the land together, create an irrigation system, share the harvests. Our stories are not just memories, they are guides for the future. If we work together, we can create a better tomorrow. The crowd was now in a fervor, voices intertwining in a chorus of support. Malik, for a moment, fell silent, his lips moving as if he were pondering. Finally, he took a deep breath and, with a gesture of his hand, asked for attention. If we go from here, if we decide to unite around our stories and actions, then I'm in. But we need to be clear about what that means. We need a plan. He looked at me and I realized there was a new determination in his eyes. Kofi nodded. A plan. That's what we need. Let's create committees, working groups. Let's listen to everyone. Every voice counts, every story matters. Together, we can find solutions. Zuri, will you join me in leading this? I felt my heart vibrate. It was a step, a first step toward the unity we so desired. I nodded affirmatively and the crowd erupted in applause. The energy was back, now with renewed focus. At that moment, looking around, I saw faces that had previously been marked by struggle and despair, now illuminated by hope. The stories we shared became the bridge that united us, and the determination to act began to form in those eyes. Malik and I were on new ground, a ground where the past was not just a memory, but a living force that could push us forward. From there, the path would be long and filled with challenges. But in that instant, the division that seemed imminent began to dissipate, and the village rose, united not just by necessity, but by the strength of the stories that define us. The climax of our struggle was far from over, but a new hope had emerged, and I knew we were ready to face whatever came next. The applause of the crowd echoed in my ears, and the vibrant energy that had once been dark now pulsed with new life. Malik and I, together, were the bridge linking the past to the future. As the enthusiastic voices intertwined in lively conversations, I realized there was still a long way to go, but the unity we felt at that moment seemed unbreakable. Zuri. Kofi's voice interrupted me, bringing me back to reality. He was surrounded by a group of villagers, all with expressions of determination. Let's gather tomorrow at dawn to discuss the plan. We need all hands and hearts willing to work." I agreed, but my mind was still buzzing with questions. What did it really mean to unite the village? How could we turn words into concrete actions? The uncertainties did not disappear, even with the spark of hope beginning to shine. That night, as I prepared to sleep, the stories I had heard in the square danced in my mind. Each account of overcoming, each shared laugh, each tear shed had intertwined into a rich and vibrant tapestry. However, one persistent thought troubled me. What if we failed? What if the drought returned and this time we didn't have enough strength to unite again? But the answer did not take long to come. As the morning sun illuminated the village, I realized that change was already underway. The first thing I noticed was the willingness on people's faces. Instead of tired, worried looks, there was a renewed glow. Villagers were gathering, discussing plans, drawing solutions, and sharing ideas. The seeds of unity were already being planted. The committees began to form quickly. The women gathered to discuss how they could optimize the cultivation, while the men organized to build an irrigation system that could withstand the driest summers. The children, excited about the change, began collecting seeds for a new community garden that would serve not only as food, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. Malik, who had until then been one of the most skeptical, became one of the most active leaders. I saw him talking to the youth and encouraging them to get involved. He was transforming, and that filled me with joy. The stories we shared opened his heart and mind, and now he was becoming an advocate for the cause. However, not everything was smooth sailing. During the meetings, I noticed some voices that were still hesitant, worried about what could happen if things didn't go as planned. I understood them. The fear of history repeating itself weighed on them. The uncertainty was a shadow that still hung over our heads, but at the same time, the determination to move forward was palpable. Zuri, an older woman named Amina, called me during one of the meetings. "What if we don't succeed? What if the harvest fails again?" There was a tremor in her voice, and I knew it was not just her doubt, but that of many others. I took a deep breath, recalling the strength of the stories we had shared. Amina, we all have fears, but it is this fear that unites us. We learn from our failures, and each mistake is an opportunity for growth. If we work together, not only to cultivate the land, but to cultivate trust, we will be ready for any challenge. The words brought a reflective silence, but it didn't last long. Soon, discussions began again, and ideas were buzzing. Change was starting to seep into the veins of the village. Slowly, the first visible changes began to appear. The crops were being tended to with more care, and the previously dry and barren soil was beginning to transform. The children played around, observing the adults, and I realized that we were not just cultivating the land, but also the next generation of storytellers and community builders. It was a process that would require time, patience, and above all, unity. But that first step, which had been taken under the tension of the square, now showed itself as a new beginning. And looking at Malik, I saw that he understood this too. Hope had become part of us, and together we were ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks passed, the village began to flourish in ways I had never imagined possible. The crops, which had once been mere promises, were now turning into abundant harvests, and the unity that had blossomed among the villagers was beginning to bear fruit, literally. Amina's concerns and those of others who hesitated about the future were slowly dissipating as the seeds we planted not only took root in the soil, but also in our hearts. One morning, while walking through the field, I felt a presence beside me. It was Malik. "Look around us, Zuri. What was despair is now hope." He pointed to the rows of green plants swaying gently in the wind. It was true. What had once been a desert of uncertainties was now transforming into a vibrant testament of resilience and faith. However, we knew that the true test was yet to come. One night, while the starry sky graced us with its beauty, a storm formed on the horizon. The dark clouds approached rapidly, and a feeling of anxiety took hold of me. What if the storm destroys everything we have built, I thought. But looking at Malik and the other villagers who were gathering again, I realized it was not the time to back down. The storm arrived with force, but to our surprise, it did not bring destruction. On the contrary, the rains that fell were exactly what we needed. The thirsty earth absorbed every drop, and the plants, which were already growing strong, absorbed the water as if it were a gift. The storm, which initially seemed a threat, became a symbol of renewal. Time passed and the harvest was plentiful. The celebrations were intense. The village came together for a great feast, where we laughed, danced, and gave thanks for every grain that had sprouted. In that moment of joy, I remembered how collective faith and unity had become our greatest strength. God had shown us that even in the storms of life, there was room for hope and regeneration. Through the story of our village, I learned that difficulties are often the fertile ground for spiritual growth. The experience taught us that divine justice was not only manifested in material blessings, but primarily in the transformation of our hearts. The unity we built allowed us to overcome not only the drought, but also the fear that prevented us from acting. God gave us the freedom to choose, and the choice to unite was the most powerful one we made. The narrator, observing the scene with a contemplative gaze, understood that the story of the village was a reflection of the biblical account of the people of Israel, who often faced trials and tribulations, but always found strength in unity and faith in God. Just like them, the villagers learned that true strength comes from community and trust in divine promises. The moral that resonated in every corner of the village was clear. Unity and faith can transform despair into hope, and what seems to be an end can reveal a new beginning. Thus, the story of Zuri, Malik, Amina, and the others became an eternal lesson in resilience and faith, echoing through generations, reminding everyone that even in the face of life's storms, love and unity are the keys to true harvest. As I look at the horizon, where the green crops stretch like a sea of hope, I cannot help but feel deeply grateful. The journey we have traveled, marked by uncertainties and challenges, was a true school of faith. I learned that just like the seeds we planted, our faith needs to be cultivated, watered, and protected. Often we encounter storms that seem to threaten everything we have built. However, it is precisely in those moments that we are called to trust in something greater than ourselves. The experience of the village taught me that obedience to God is not a matter of following rules, but of allowing ourselves to be guided by a deep and unwavering love. When we unite our efforts and hearts, we experience the manifestation of divine grace in our lives. The unity that formed among us was not just a response to despair, but a deliberate choice to love and support one another. In every smile, in every act of solidarity, I saw the presence of God reflected in us. These lessons are not just to be told, but must be lived. Sometimes, in the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we forget the importance of reaching out to others, of listening to and supporting those around us. The story of the village reminds us that the true harvest is not measured only by what we can accumulate, but by what we are capable of sharing. Each of us has the power to plant seeds of love and compassion, and these seeds can blossom into something extraordinary. The narrator, while observing the vibrant scene of the celebration in the village, reflects on the depth of this journey. The story of Zuri, Malik, Amina, and the others is a vivid representation of human resilience and the ability to come together in times of crisis. It is a reminder that, like the people of Israel, we are often tested by our circumstances, but how we respond to these tests can shape not only our future, but also the future of the community around us. The moral that permeates this narrative is clear. Difficulties are opportunities for spiritual and communal growth. Unity and faith not only transform despair into hope, but also prepare us to face the storms of life with courage and grace. This testimony teaches us that, even in the midst of adversity, we can find strength in friendship, solidarity, and trust in divine promises. Therefore, as we let this story guide us, we are challenged to cultivate a spirit of unity in our own lives. May we remember that together we are stronger, and that faith, when shared, becomes a light that illuminates the darkest paths. The true harvest is not only in reaping fruits, but in sowing love, hope, and faith in every action we take. May this lesson resonate in our hearts and inspire us to live in a way that reflects the beauty of unity and trust in God.